Do you remember when this was National Signing Day? It was a big deal. I used to take off of work, sit around, watch. Hey, who's Alabama getting? Oh, Mark Ingram, Julio Jones, all those guys. And then this was the day. Now it really isn't the day anymore. It's just the day that ends the day, really, which happened in the early signing period. So like, subscribe, thumbs up. Let's get to talking about Alabama and everything going on with National Signing Day and this football recruiting class. All right, that's Clint Lamb. I'm Mick Gillispie. Like, subscribe, thumbs up. Happy National Signing Day, Clint. But it doesn't feel like the old National Signing Days.
It is a different time, brother. These used to be Christmas. This was one of my favorite times. I actually was thinking about it. I can remember sitting in class. It was my first day of class, second semester, which granted at Birmingham Southern, we had like interim that would go the entire month of January. And then we would start this second semester, spring semester in early February. So it was like, I think like February 2nd or something like that. And I can remember it was 2011. So I guess it was my third year of college. I'm sitting in class. It's syllabus day, which, speaking candidly, I very rarely showed up for syllabus day. To me, that was a free day. But I was watching National Signing Day on my laptop, and I can remember exposing myself because when Cyrus Kwanjo committed to Auburn, I said "fuck" in the middle of class. I very much apologize for the language.
Yeah.
Right here out the gate, but that was the word that came out of my mouth, and everybody in the class turned to look at me, and the professor, Dr. Archer, it was an English class. That was interesting, and then we all know what happened after that, as far as him actually committing to Alabama, ended up becoming a really good player. But like, that was the excitement level. And now it's lost a lot of its luster, to be honest with you.
Well, I mean, they changed it to where it was like, it used to be today was when all the action happened. And now, like, it's in December, all that early signing stuff. And then, here we are kind of just hanging around and, waiting on the one or two guys that are getting bought by other programs. Ty Haywood, like Michigan came in with a bunch of money, and he was a guy that grew up an Alabama fan, wanted to be at Alabama until the money was there, and then decided to go to Michigan. And Michigan used the Ohio State formula because they watched their arch rival buy a championship, and they're going to try to do the same thing. And there's no rules against that. But obviously their big time boosters are stepping up and paying. It's a shame that college football, amateur athletics has gotten to this point, but it has. And Michigan bought a guy from us. They bought the quarterback from LSU. They just went out and bought a bunch of players, and they got Ty Haywood. But you know what? I'm not angry at Alabama for not buying in and paying up this guy's ransom.
This is like a temporary thing. Like right now, teams are spending a lot of money. They know that revenue sharing's coming. If you can get all these guys in, quote unquote, under the deadline, go ahead and get them locked up. The people are hoping, okay, if we get these guys on campus, like the transfer portal to an extent will sort of settle down because there won't be as much of a financial incentive to enter the transfer portal and go chase bags. So we just got to get them on campus. Let's pay them all right now. They're actually front loading some of this money that's designed to be for 2025 and 2026 as far as the revenue sharing and stuff. And you're going to find that some of these schools in 2026 are not going to have the funds to be able to, it's like trying to get that kickstart. And if you give these guys money, you got to continue to pay them, but you're hoping that some of this other stuff can help float it. It's going to be an interesting process to see those teams that do that, how it works out for them in the long run. But for Alabama, I think that it's a very strategic, discipline type of plan. You got to have discipline. You want to go, someone comes to you and say, hey, we got this new offer from this school. We would like to renegotiate. We would love to stick with you, but we want more money. It's like, if that's the amount that you have set aside to, whether it is pay that particular player, whether it's pay that particular position, like, You got to stick to that. It's tough. You want to do that for everybody, but the second you do it for even one, everybody's knocking on your door, wanting more. And it's something you got to weather this storm. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to get completely resolved, but I do think a lot of this is going to get fixed.
Well, it needs to. I mean, the canary in the coal mine was when Nick Saban's like, my wife said, we used to worry about all the kids and making sure they were taken care of and, all the things that they needed. And then we started doing the events and all the families cared about was how much money they were going to get.
And how much playing time.
Yeah, right. Well, that kind of went hand in hand with the money, but they just cared about how much money they were getting. And, and then all of a sudden you're stuck in a spot where, now instead of them being there to learn and to go through the process, they're holding you hostage, based on how much money that they feel like they can get from you, and Ohio State proved that you go out and you spend $30 million, you're going to get a national championship. They did. They spent the most money and it directly translated into a national championship for them, and then their arch rival Michigan's doing the same thing. And I don't blame them. Guys, like and subscribe. Give us a thumbs up as you hang out with us. Good to see all of you guys here in the comments section. We'll check those as well as we talk recruiting. That's Clint Lamb. And I'm Mick Gillispie here on Cover Crimson and covercrimson.com. So here's the thing, Clint. Now we're kind of past the National Signing Day, and eventually on the show, we're going to talk about some of the guys that we're looking at for the next class. But this class still turned out great. I mean, Keelan Russell, according to 24/7 Sports, the highest ranked, Bama player ever coming out of recruiting.
Starts with the quarterback, goes beyond. It's kind of the Nick Saban approach where you kind of take a look at pretty much every position and you feel pretty good about it. I mean, you go to running back, A.K. Deer, go to receiver, maybe not, the star power when you had Caleb Cunningham, but you got Latzir Brooks, who I think was severely underrated. You got Derek Meadows, big body guy, ranked right outside of the top 100, brings a specific skill set that could be useful down the line. You look at tight end, love the combination that they got there. You look at the offensive line, signed several guys, 4 players, including some, elite blue chip players in Jackson Lloyd and Michael Carroll. Defensive line's the one you look at. And I think Steve Mbamoa is, man, I was watching him, just the way that he plays, him being an interior guy, a complete ox. I think that he's going to be a much bigger impact player than people realize, but he was not super highly rated. He was a 3-star last year. He was one of the top JUCO players available in this cycle, but outside of him, you really didn't sign any interior players outside of London Simmons, who's a 3-star guy, kind of a project, has some likable traits, but needs to, develop some completeness to his game. But then you look at linebacker or edge, you got Justin Hill there out there on the edge. You absolutely love that. You get Henry, Cavante Henry, a JUCO guy who can play bandit or wolf. You look at linebacker, maybe not from a star power perspective, but I like all 3 of the guys they added. Abdul Sanders, obviously Daryl Johnson, and then Luke Metz. I think all 3 of those guys are underrated. Daryl Johnson's more of a long-term guy, but then you look in the secondary at corner, safety, love Ivan Taylor, love Dijon Lee, love Chuck McDonald. So it's like across the board, you start hitting on all these positions, and it's like for the most part, outside of the defensive line from a star power perspective, maybe the off-ball linebackers, I think defensive line's a little bit more concerning. Interior defensive line is a little bit more concerning for people, but outside of really that, I think they kind of did exactly what they needed to do, and I think all these guys are going to provide depth and really help this Alabama team in 2025.
That's what you hope for, right? I mean, and a lot of these guys are on campus already, which is kind of the way that things work right now. But, to end up with the number 3 national recruiting class, it's not just about the Keelan Russells, the Michael Carrolls, Big Mike, or Dijon Lee, the 5 stars. It's about the depth. You mentioned that. When I look at this class, I really feel comfortable with the offensive linemen that Alabama's bringing in. I mean, I feel like that's an area where we've been disappointed over the last few years, but this class, even with Ty Haywood, getting bought by Michigan, I still feel really good about where this offensive line class is.
Yeah, trench play is so important in the SEC, right? I mean, we talk about some of these other spots, and you got to get effective play at quarterback. And You got to have weapons for that quarterback. I think we saw just how rough that can be, watching Georgia and Carson Beck this year. There's important positions all over the place, but in the trenches, it matters so much. And when you look at Nick Saban's dynasty and kind of how he built it always excellent trench play, both sides of the football. The offensive line is in really good shape there. I like Alabama's defensive front this year. I think Tim Keenan. I think James Smith. James Smith's one of my biggest breakout players. We'll be talking about that more, as spring gets closer. We're going to be, doing some stuff with that. But like some of the depth they had, like I said, Steve Mbomoa, severely underrated signing. I say that about a lot of guys, but just when I watch this cat and just, when you look back to Dave Womack and the success that he had at Ole Miss, Robert Mdici was a guy, much higher rated coming out of high school, obviously, but skill sets are kind of similar. Like he was just like this big, thick body that really could have played out there on the edge if you would have, kept his body a certain way, but you had him gain weight. He ended up being a very disruptive interior pass rusher. Didn't lead to a lot of sacks. Like the actual production or stat sheet really wasn't there, but just the way that they utilized him, I think Stephen Mbomoa can be to Kane Womack what he was to Dave. And so I think I love what he brings to the table there. But from a defensive line perspective, that would be my biggest concern long term, is just making sure that this next class, you're getting the right guys up front defensively, because that's going to really matter. I mean, you can stack up on all these pass rushers and stuff and corners, and I think that's all great. Alabama's doing a phenomenal job there, but you need to start replenishing some of the stuff that's going to eventually be leaving, up front defensively.
Yeah. And I mean, that's what National Signing Day is all about. And this is number 3 recruiting class. And the other thing, and as we talk about this class and then start to look to next year, the other concern that I have, or the concern I have, is there's only 2 Alabama guys. And I think you got to have Alabama guys come to Alabama. You got to have the local guys. You got to win the local recruiting battles. You want those guys that are going to explain to everybody why we hate Auburn.
Yeah. And I think Alabama, when you look at what they're doing, first of all, the state of Alabama for 2026 has got some really good players in it. Zion Gibson's a guy who's already committed. That's absolutely huge. But you look at like Tank Jones, you look at Sadarian Morgan, you look at EJ Crowell, Jamarian Matthews. Like, they got some good in-state players this year, and Alabama's in a pretty good spot with a lot of those guys. And so they need to be able to close all of those guys. Really, I mean, you look at the positions they would be adding to, would be huge helps. But I think in-state recruiting, we've talked about it a lot. Last year, the familiarity factor with the guys they were recruiting out there on the West Coast, that seemed to be the priority. Got to make sure you keep this pipeline going, trying to make up a bunch of ground and building relationships pretty much from scratch. That was going to be difficult to do, but now they've had some time, and it seems like, based off of junior day and the feedback from a lot of that stuff, they're in a pretty good position with a lot of these players, and I think they'll do a much better job in state this time around.
Well, we'll be paying close attention to it, and that kind of, I guess, leads us into a transition on this year's recruiting class. You got one guy committed, and you had your first junior day in Tuscaloosa this past Saturday. And I feel like everything kind of starts with Tank Jones. I mean, you want to get the guy, the 5-star out of St. Paul's. Jake Coker says, hey, I heard Alabama's obviously up there, but Oregon's in the mix. I mean, you can't let this guy go to Oregon. This is the type of guy you build your program around.
What I love about Tank Jones is you're really not going to find a guy who's more physically gifted. I think he's listed, according to the recruiting websites, he's listed at like 6'4", 230, but he already seems bigger than that to me. I think he's got the frame. He can easily be a 270, 275 pound defensive lineman playing that bandit position, rather easily. And from a body type perspective, I've actually compared him, just the trajectory in which Myles Garrett went through when he was coming out of high school. He was listed at 6'4", 240. He arrived in College Station at 255 his freshman season. And then he ended up, by the time he left after his third year, he was 270 pounds. Now he's listed at 272 for the Cleveland Browns. That's kind of the trajectory that I would see for a guy like Tank Jones. And, when you look at his skill set, complete package, big, powerful frame, really advanced as far as both being a run defender and understanding leverage. As far as being a pass rusher, he's got versatility. Like, you can play him in that bandit position and he can survive on all three downs out there, but also, he can play inside. And what I love the most about him is just the violent nature in which he plays and the motor. The motor is like the infectious part where a guy's just going 100 miles an hour all the time. I think Quay Russaw played that way coming out of high school. I think he's continued to play that way when he's been healthy and able so far for Alabama. But the more guys you get like that, those are the dogs, in my opinion. A guy like Tank Jones being an in-state player, being a 5-star prospect, number, I think, 12 player in the country. He's a guy that if you're Alabama, he's kind of a must get.
Well, you got to get him, right? And these are the guys Saban always got. E.J. Crowell, who's the running back that just reclassified from Jackson, is another player that if you're Alabama, this was going to be the number one back in 27, but now he's coming out in 26. We saw, obviously Ryan Williams do this, but I feel like this is another guy that that is in state that you want to win. And he's been to Tuscaloosa a bunch. He was just back. He was there under Saban, coming to visit. He's been coming for a long time. But this, I pass Jackson every time I drive to Tuscaloosa. I mean, it's right on my route, big time football program. And someone, again, that if you're Alabama, you really got to win these battles, particularly for a great running back.
Yeah, and I mean, just the fact that you had Turbo Rogers committed in this cycle that just finished up. You had him and Deere. Obviously, Turbo ended up going to Ohio State, which I don't think Alabama's staff was upset about that. But that means you just signed one running back in this class. And so when you look at like Jam Miller, he's going to be a senior. Draylon Washington, we know he's going to be kind of a one-year guy. And so there will be some opportunities for Crowell. And I say, it might be Crowell. I just say Crowell. I've been doing that ever since Isaiah Crowell back in the day. But, just watching him play, what's crazy is that he should be going into his junior year of high school. Now, this is going to be his final year. Mm-hmm. And just from how advanced he is, everything that you look for at the running back position, this cat's got. The explosive ability, like the burst, the short area quickness. He's physical. He's kind of an inside-out runner. He can stretch defenses sideline to sideline, stretch a run game sideline to sideline. I think that's absolutely huge. He's got the home run speed, the contact balance. And I just, when I'm watching him, I can't believe that he's so young. He's going to be, kind of like Ryan Williams, where he's arriving on campus, and you still know that he's got more serious developmental years as far as like he's going to continue to get bigger and stronger and faster and all those things. And just knowing that he's a very special player. I mean, obviously reclassifying, I think he dropped to like 180 overall. I think he's like running back 15 or 16 or something like that. So he's not ranked super high right now. That is going to change. I guarantee it. He is going to be one of the top running backs in the country. Probably going to be one of the most sought after running backs in the country, and Alabama's in a really good position for him. But it's not, Georgia's after him pretty hard. Texas is after him pretty hard. Obviously Auburn, being an in-state school, they're after him as well. If you can land this type of player, and you can kind of start to stack some of these, elite backs like A.K. Deere in this current cycle, and then adding Crowell in the next one. I mean, that would be absolutely huge for the backfield moving forward, because Kalen DeBoer, while this offense is going to feature a lot of guys in the passing game, you're going to see them throwing the football around a little bit. The efficiency in which the run game can, be effective, and the efficiency in which it runs, multiple guys can have success, and they can end up putting up some pretty good yardage and having their talent showcased in this offense. But, you got to have the horses to show them off.
And you want to win the in-state battles too. And I feel like that's been for Courtney Morgan, Kalen DeBoer, their biggest weakness right now, other than, they lost the 3 unranked teams last year. Other than that, I mean, I feel like they've done a really good job of everything that they've done at Alabama. So we'll find out. I mean, this will be the first recruiting cycle where it's been totally them, right? And they've got one guy committed right now. But they're going to need more guys committed,
It's
to put a
coming.
class right. I mean, to put a class together. Now, I wanted to talk about their ability to get players from all over the country. Brandon Arrington is a speedster out of California. He's a 5-star. He was just in Tuscaloosa from Mount McGill High School, and La Mesa, California. I know that they feel like there's a big lean to Texas A&M, but I'm telling you, man, these guys they get the elite prospects from California, which is pretty funny.
Well, yeah, and I mean the fact that Alabama has had so much success going to California, like that's a big selling point for Arrington when he gets on campus. He gets around, a lot of the corners who have had success. Xavier Brown, Damani Jackson. Obviously, you got Chuck McDonald coming in. You get around those guys and you see them having success and they're having fun, and it's like, man, I could see myself being a part of this. These guys all made that trip across country, and they're all having quite a bit of success. I mean, Xavier Brown coming in as one of those types of players and being a starter pretty much from game one. I mean, that's huge. And the fact that they rotate in the secondary so much, like, even if there's talent in that secondary room, that if you're performing well in practice and you're good enough to play, they're going to get you onto the field. What's crazy is just the guys that they sign, like you talk about Xavier Brown, and Jalen Mbakwe's now at receiver, and Zay Mincy's now at safety, and Jameer Grimsley was a guy who kind of a project that they signed that ended up transferring to Florida. Wasn't even on campus, but for probably a couple of weeks. So only one of those guys ended up sticking around or at least at the corner position that you had originally signed in that class. But then you bring in Dijon Lee, you bring in Chuck McDonald, another couple of really good top 100 prospects, Dijon Lee being a 5-star, plus you bring in Cam Calhoun, who has some multi-year, long-term potential. We don't know what's going to end up happening with Dijon Lee. Does he stay on the perimeter? Does he play, the Husky position? Does he play safety? I personally think he's going to be on the perimeter. I know he's going to start there, and we'll kind of have to see how he kind of develops. But I mean, that's a guy you bring in that, and then now you got Zion Gibson, who's already committed. You got like Jordan Edmonds, who is another player they're in really good shape for. We'll have to see how that turns out. He's one of the top, I think, 11 or 12 cornerbacks in the country. And Brandon Arrington, and he's an athlete. He could end up playing receiver, but he can play corner, he can play receiver, and from all indications, he wants to stay on the defensive side of the football. So I think they're recruiting him as a corner, and premier athlete. He's long, over 6'2", about 180 pounds. He was improving as a receiver last year. Like, you saw the route tree developing and stuff, but what I'm trying to do is more so watch him through a defensive back lens, because that's where I think he's going to end up. And I think he's one of the top players in the country for a reason. And I hope Alabama's able to land him.
Well, that's the goal. Your thoughts on the first junior day of this cycle, this 26 cycle. And I guess we're officially in there now. I mean, even though today was National Signing Day, it's really not the same National Signing Day that it used to be. Don't you miss the old signing day?
Oh man, yeah. I don't see how anybody couldn't. This was like a dead period, or it is a dead period. Like, you're getting ready for the Super Bowl, and that's great. I'm looking forward to watching that game, but it's like this was just something to kind of look forward to and get excited about and follow. Like, it's kind of like once Alabama's season ended, whenever that happens, a lot of fans are like, okay, I mean, I'll continue to watch the football, but I'm not super excited about it. Then it hits the off season, and there's like this period, hearing about, a few weeks, you'll start gearing up, getting ready for spring practice. Excitement will start to return. You got a quarterback battle. You got Ryan Grubb coming in. You got a lot of things to be excited about and looking at. But for now, it's like, it would be great if there was something that could really pull fans and generate some buzz and some excitement. It's unfortunate. I understand to an extent why they did it. I just wish there was some way that we could go back to the old way, because that was way more fun, and the timing of it always made this time of year great.
Well, it turned into an event, and I mean, like, the NFL has an event with, obviously the draft, right? Which has turned into something so cool. Major League Baseball doesn't have something like that. Like, major sports don't necessarily have that extra event. Signing day was that event. And then we got into this like early signing thing. And then Nick Saban told us, he was like, hey, this is going to turn into everybody signing early. Do you really want this? And of course they didn't listen. And now, think about it. There's nothing going on. I mean, I know the Super Bowl's this week, but I mean, I'm just saying, like, you could own this time right now. Everybody'd be signing. It'd be such a big deal. But instead, it's like, it's a nothing burger. We're just showing up. We're talking about it. Hey, we're getting ready to, switch gears here and start talking about, next year's recruiting class and all that. Could be like, I remember watching these recruiting class days, and it would be like those guys, they'd be like, all right, I'm going to put the Alabama hat on. Yeah. And then you'd be there. You'd be like, yeah, we got him, like
It was fun. Yeah. I mean, the Rashawn Evans, I mean, that's like one, my niece was being born and I was at the hospital going back and forth, trying to go out where there was better service, where I could figure out what was going on. Like, I mean, it's just pretty, I feel like there's every Bama fan, every fan of every college, I'm sure has got stories if you follow recruiting pretty closely, but just Bama fans during the Nick Saban era, whether it be Julio Jones, when he, decided, I mean, I remember being on like a field trip when I was in school. Obviously, I think I was a junior or a senior, and we're at like the mall after whatever we did, and everybody goes and like there was a restaurant there. It wasn't a B-Dubs back then. It was like a Ruby Tuesdays or something. But they had like a TV on, and everybody, all the Bama fans that were watching were kind of crowded around. It was like there was so much excitement, and it feels like that the excitement for signing day has kind of been replaced by the NFL draft. Like the excitement level for the NFL draft has steadily climbed over the course of the last, I'm not saying that it wasn't already climbing prior to, but I really feel like as far as like the destination drafts and all that stuff, it's really taken off like the last 10 years probably.
Right.
With signing day, it's like because of moving it and stuff, it's lost. It used to be like the draft. It was like this big event and everybody paid attention to it. Everybody was pumped about it. And there was no football going on. So there was like this itch for it. It's exciting. There's a ton going on, but it being right there in the middle of the season or towards the tail end of the season, but this football still going on. You're not itching for that football fix as much. And so you're excited about paying attention, but I feel like it's lost something. And I just thought it was good for the game that they had it set up the way that they did, because it was a spot on the calendar that really was lacking, something like that to get people excited.
Well, it was definitely one of those things like, where you kind of jump in there and, you look around. Now, I see where you guys have mentioned, and I want to say this is true. Scott Huff was fired by the Seahawks. We'll talk about that in a second. We're not going to let that out. I let this show go off without mentioning that now, but I want to stick with recruiting right now and talk about another guy that was there this past weekend, defensive back out of Lee County High in Georgia, a guy named L.A. Jackson. I like a guy named L.A. Jackson. And I want to see.
You're from L.A., right?
Hey, man, I live in L.A. too. L.A. down here in Fairhope, South Alabama, Lower Alabama. L.A. Jackson is another guy I want to come to Alabama because I love those nicknames.
Well, they up where I'm from, Athens, Alabama, there's Calhoun Community College, and people that used to have to go to Calhoun used to tell people when they were asked, "Hey, you go anywhere for college?" and they'd say, "Yeah, I go to UCLA," which is University of Calhoun alongside the airport because it's right next to an airport. So I totally get you, man. There's a lot of different LAs, but he's he's a really good defensive back. He's fun to watch. He's pretty thin, I think like 175 pounds, but like when you watch him and stuff, it really fits the style in which Kane Womack's going to want to play. I think he's ranked just inside the top 200. So he's not like super highly rated, but it's just these are the guys that you need, man. Like he has got starter potential. I think he's got a lot of upside. Like I don't think he's even close to growing from a physical standpoint, just the length being 6'3". Like you're starting to see a theme wherever they can get length, whether it be Zay Mincy, whether it be Dijon Lee, some of the other guys they're recruiting, Brandon Arrington, it's across the board. They like and prefer length in the secondary, and this guy certainly provides it. And when you look at like Keon Sabb, like he plays a lot of corner for his high school team, but with Keon Sabb being, kind of expected, I think he's only going to be like a redshirt junior because of where he got hurt. But I think that he can end up being a guy who leaves after this next season. And, if that ends up happening, I could totally see a guy like L.A. Jackson playing safety at Alabama.
Some of you guys are like L.A. Knight. I know L.A. Knight from wrestling. I'm aware of that.
A lot of
Watched the
LAs.
Royal Rumble, and he got thrown out, but he's a great entertainer. All right, but this is LA Jackson. We need our own LA. So that's where we are recruiting. Clint and I are going to get on here and try to get on here once a week and talk recruiting with you guys. Junior Day turned out great for Alabama. All you're hearing is that people, they come to Tuscaloosa and they see Kalen DeBoer, and one of his biggest strengths is connecting with the fans. He does a great job of that. And he also connects with recruits and their families this kind of the same way. Like, he's just a people person. And so I'm looking for Alabama to really knock down some commitments from this last Saturday.
Yeah, and I do want to Chris Waltman, he commented and asked if I'd seen the Sincere guy, which Sincere Johnson, the linebacker, a lot of people are comparing him to Reuben Foster. Chris, I haven't got a chance to watch him. I'm just really starting to get into the thick of things of the 2026 guys and being able to collect my own thoughts. But I do know, I mean, Alabama's made a good impression. He's from right in the, Ohio State's backyard. A lot of people feel like he's an Ohio State lock. Never say never with anybody. I think Alabama's doing as good as you could possibly do for a guy who is very much, the high school that he goes to is kind of a stronghold for Ohio State, but Alabama's right there battling. And as soon by the next episode, I can promise you he's going to be one of the top guys that I go watch, and I'll be able to give you a full breakdown of at least what I see. And I mean, just because I see it don't mean that it's correct, but it's my thoughts and views on it. But I've heard he's a really good player, and I can't wait to check him out.
Yeah, and that's going to be the way that this is going to go. I mean, we're going to keep on trying to just grind out exactly who and why and what's going on with them as they come to Tuscaloosa. Exciting, though, for Alabama to kind of have a big junior day. And now all of a sudden you move all your focus to those guys, like, not that it really wasn't there, but the fact that it's, the signing day's over, and now it's time to focus on what we got going on here instead of, this last recruiting class, it just really kind of wraps up in December, but I'm excited about it. And, like I said, if you can get some of these guys to jump on board and start building this class around them, hopefully there's some in-state guys, but you also want to have those national guys as well.
Well, and one thing that I want to make sure that everybody's keeping in mind, how many players do we see climb, Mick? I mean, Keelan Russell was being judged as an SMU 3-star quarterback that Alabama got, and everybody's like, wow, big time. And then he ended up being the highest rated player that Alabama's ever signed. So, Jackson Lloyd, Michael Carroll, former, they were 3-star players, a year ago. And so, like, there's so many examples of guys who, just it's an evaluation process. Guys develop differently, first of all, but also haven't had a chance to really see certain guys. Like Lazir Brooks' biggest issue is that he's not like a flashy guy. Mm-hmm. He committed to Alabama. That's where he wanted to go. Didn't make a big to-do about it. Didn't really take a lot of visits and do all that stuff. Didn't really do the circuit to where you could really evaluate him and get a good idea. So you're going off a tape and limited factors really in general. And that kind of causes these recruiting services to be reluctant on where to put you. But Charles Power with On3, has him rated. I think he ended up finishing in the top 100, if I'm not mistaken. If not, it was right outside. But I actually want to say he was pretty decently inside the top 100 by the last update. But I'm right there with him. Like, when you watch this cat on tape, I'm telling you, he's explosive. He's electric. And it's just, but just understand that some of these guys might not have the star power of others, but they are going to be really good players. And one thing that I'm doing now, my approach was, if Alabama got a commitment from a guy, I'd go check him out. But originally, the whole thing that got me passionate about all this stuff was recruiting back in the, beginning of the Nick Saban era. Alfred McCullough, Rolando McClain. Like, Alfred was my teammate. We won the state championship together at Athens in 2006. But like, when he was going to Alabama, Robin Ezel, was our state championship quarterback. He ended up going to Alabama. But like, during that time, me and my best friend William Ming, who ended up going to Alabama too, when we were freshmen in high school, we started following all the recruiting and all that stuff. Then I got out of it and it became like I was so team focused. Like, just if you're on the team, I try to know everything about you. I watch the tape, do all that. But it's just, you can, with what I used to do as far as the NFL draft and all the player evaluations going from college to the NFL, there's only so much room up there. Like, so I would just not really worry about the high school guys until they got to Alabama. Now I'm kind of shifting the focus more. I still do some draft stuff and look at it from Alabama's lens, but now it's me putting my focus there. And so we're going to continue to I'll be able to talk about all these guys, ask all the questions, but it's still kind of early in the process. But man, it's been a lot of fun. There's a lot of really good high school players out there.
Yep, and we got all the way until December next year to see who comes on board and who jumps out. All right, you guys wanted to bring this up, and we are going to bring it up. Scott Huff was definitely fired by Washington.
Seattle,
yeah, Washington. He was with Washington, and then obviously went to the Seahawks instead of coming to Tuscaloosa. So I don't know if this is going to be a move that Alabama is going to make. I think they're pretty happy with Coach Cap. But once Grubb left, that kind of left Coach Huff kind of out there, and then they hire a new offensive coordinator, and that guy brings in his offensive line coach, John Benton, and then they replace him, Scott Huff with him. Do you think this is a move? Could Alabama find a spot there? And I got to say this, like, the Seahawks were upset about their offensive line play before Scott Huff got there. Okay.
Big time.
They sucked. And then they got Geno Smith, who is a mediocre quarterback. They went 10-7. And instead of being happy about 10-7, they fired Grubb and Huff. And it feels like they're going to be like 7-10 next year. You know what I mean? Like, it's just the way that this thing works, but we'll find out. How does this affect Alabama? How could they go and get him? Yeah, I mean, AK says, hey, we hire him as an analyst. That was a trick that Nick Saban used a lot to bring in people he wanted.
Yeah, that's possible. I mean, I don't know. Here's what I'll say about Grubb. First of all, it's like, had it not been philosophical differences between OC and head coach, he's still in the NFL. He did well enough in his first season as an NFL offensive coordinator where a lot of teams would have kept him. And because everybody knew, it's like, what do you think he's going to have it figured out and go into that level, and just how drastically different the game is, that he was going to figure it out in a season? Like, I don't think anybody expected that. What cost him, and what I think is benefiting Alabama now, was the fact that the way that he approaches as far as kind of throwing the football, not being more committed to the run game and doing all that. It's a defensive minded head coach, and he wants to play more of a complementary style of football, where it's like, hey, anytime you got those defensive guys, they want to play defense and they want to run the football. And so that's kind of where the philosophical differences come in. And I think that ultimately cost, Ryan Grubb. But as far as like Scott Huff, he is a good offensive line coach. That Seattle Seahawks offensive line, just like you said, it has been terrible. It's been terrible for a minute. It was bad, really bad this year. Lack of talent, and it hadn't been from a lack of trying. It's just, I think like body type and stuff, it was a little bit different. I think that it was a different style of player than what Scott Huff was used to. And then on top of that, it's just, you needed to continue to have kind of an influx of talent in that room, and just, he wasn't given the opportunity. He was a one and done. So I'm not really concerned about his ability to coach the offensive line. I've seen it on the college level and know he's capable. And if the coaching staff, if Kalen DeBoer and obviously Ryan Grubb is now going to be a part of that brain trust and being on these conversations and stuff, if they feel like he can help this football team, one thing that we've learned about Kalen DeBoer recently is he can make tough decisions.
Right.
If he feels like it's going to benefit Alabama, it's going to benefit the Alabama staff. And
right.
If they feel like Scott Huff will do that, more so, because I think they really like Coach Cap. Like, a lot of people are down on him. I'm not down on him. I think, the style of play, a lot of factors. I mean, I've talked about it 100 times. I'm not going to get into that, but I still believe in him. But if the coaching staff wants to go in a different direction, if they feel like they can get Scott Huff and that he would be an upgrade, because they didn't want to go in a different direction than Nick Sheridan, but they're like, hey, a guy like Ryan Grubb doesn't come around too often, and we're willing to make the tough decisions to make that happen, to make this team better. It's like they probably don't want to get rid of Coach Cap, but if they feel like Huff is a better option and he can help them, they'll figure out a way to make that happen as well. I just don't know if that's going to happen or not. And Yes, I absolutely know Jaquez Pride. Very good receiver running back that we played with. He was wild pregame. I'll put it that way.
All right, final thing on the show, guys. First off, thank you to mybookie.ag. Use that promo code next round to double your initial deposit. Next round, as the big game comes up on Sunday, go to mybookie.ag. It's the Philadelphia Bamas against the Kansas City Alabamas. And so I'm sure we're all pulling for Philadelphia, right? 7 guys that went to Alabama, starting quarterback, receiver, offensive lineman, and more that are guys that we covered right here, Clint and I, as they ascended through the University of Alabama and into the NFL. All right, Clint, final thing on this recruiting class. I'm going to pull up this right here. This is 24/7 Sports, Texas, Georgia, and Alabama. So Bama ends up third in the SEC, but they also end up third in the country. What do you what do you think about that?
Isn't that interesting? And Ohio State's spending big money, Oregon's spending big money, Michigan's spending big money. Obviously, Texas is too, but you got all these big teams swinging for the fences and trying to outspend each other, and Texas is certainly involved in that. And yet, the top 3 teams in the recruiting cycle was 3 SEC programs. I mean, obviously, transfer portal plays into that as well. That's where a lot of your big money is going to come from. But I think Alabama's in fine shape. A lot of people have been surprised, even though we've tried to warn them that by losing Ty Haywood, that they were going to drop from number 2 to number 3, and so now they're for some reason surprised. But this was always coming. We knew that he wasn't going to be a part of the class, and we knew that was going to drop them to 3. So now that it's happened, 3 is Kalen DeBoer can recruit. I'll put it that way. Any questions about that? I guess the next hurdle for him now is, can he recruit in state? And I think he's going to answer those questions this next cycle.
All right. That's 24/7 Sports. Let's click over to our former employer and on 3 and see if there's any difference. Texas, Georgia, Alabama, Oregon, Ohio State. Looks pretty familiar.
Yeah. It's same. And I mean, all of those schools have got great talent. Oregon's obviously spent a lot of money in the transfer portal as well.
Mm-hmm.
They brought in some really good players. Alabama's taking a different approach with the transfer portal. This is one of those, just trust the process. Let's see how it turns out. I think Isaiah Horton is severely underrated as far as that addition. I think Cam Calhoun, because he wasn't like a full-time starter or really wasn't even a starter, he was just a guy who played a ton.
Yeah.
Just for different reasons, some of these guys were ranked a little bit lower. Some of them were more so signed out of necessity. A Gunham, from Ball State, that's one where it's like project, like the upside, but he was more, we really need bodies at tackle. So, and he's, a guy who could end up being a really good player, but I don't think he's there yet. But most of these players, in my opinion, I see the vision. I think they're going to be pretty okay.
Well, there you go. The only difference is that flip-flop Oregon and Ohio State, right? One won the national championship, one won the Pac or the Big Ten, and both of them have a ton of money. But both of them can recruit. But Texas, Georgia, and Alabama, the 1, 2, and 3, and like we said, Ty Haywood was bought outright by Michigan, and that's just the way that it's going to go until there's rules and regulations on this stuff. But you know what? I mean, I'm not saying I would do any different. Like I've got my price, like the $1 Million Man used to say, in wrestling. Clint, fun show. Let's get back together again next week and talk recruiting. Alabama's obviously going to have coaches out on the trail until the dead period. They had another successful recruiting weekend. Now you got Ryan Grubb. We'll see what happens with Scott Huff. Is he someone that comes to Tuscaloosa? He's obviously part of the DeBoer family. So we'll be covering all that. What do you got going on at covercrimson.com?
Yeah, a lot of this stuff as far as watching tape. I did it yesterday with Tank Jones. I'll continue to do it with a lot of these guys that I watched today. But it's kind of a running thread where I just share my thoughts, maybe share a couple of clips to Twitter, and then I just expand on it and give kind of my scouting report and kind of where I think they fit in and why they're an important get and all that stuff. And so that I started that yesterday. It's just got Tank Jones in it right now, but I'll continue to update it with guys, and I think people will find that pretty useful. And then we also got a bunch of other stuff coming too. We've talked about it for a while. as far as like recipe for winning a national championship, what you need. I've continued to work on that, but that'll be, coming out at some point soon.
Thank you guys in the comments section. Again, thumbs up, like, and subscribe if you're not part of what we do here at Cover Crimson. We try to put new content out for you every single day, and we'll continue to do that. So roll tide. We got the Super Bowl coming up with all those Bama players on Sunday, but we got lots to talk about between now and then, including Bama basketball, which will be back in action coming up this weekend after getting the entire week off. They're ranked number 3 right now. And, we're watching that as well. And from the views on your videos, you guys aren't really that excited about basketball yet. Get there, man.
It's coming.
Fill out that bracket, and you're going to be like, well, I normally get into basketball in March. You got a great basketball program right now. Get into it right now. Take advantage of it. All right, for Clint Lamb, I'm Mick Gillispie. Thanks for hanging out with us, guys. And again, roll tide, everybody.